Chapter 1, June 1866. Rain and wind lashed the schooner Diana as she heeled into the gale. Waves crashed against the hull, but these waves felt different, a subtle change that resonated through the deck and the lines. Land was near, deflecting the water. With a surge of excitement, Captain Matthew Percy leaned far out from the rail, right hand clenched to the netting, left hand clasping his union cap to his head. A safety line dug into his waist, the other end pegged near the bowsprit, as Diana heaved upward over a wave and crashed down again on the other side, adding a needless shower of ocean to the soaking he'd already earned. Lightning snapped through the sky. His skin tingled, the hair on his arms standing up. For a moment, Matt held his breath, suspended between the bucking ship and the lightning's veil of fire. In that flare of brilliant light, he saw the island that shouldn't be there. "Land ho! Hard a starboard! Ready all hands!" he shouted, his voice already hoarse. Again, the ship heaved beneath him, and he absorbed the impact with bent knees. "There is no land anywhere near, Captain." The purser, John Crowley, hollered back. The pitching sea tossed Crowley against the rail like a soldier caught by a cannon's blast. "You've seen the chart." "Oh, there's land," muttered Tahari, the pilot they'd picked up at Tenerife. He crouched at the rail near Matt's feet, staring outward, oblivious to the rain. Demon-haunted land, spirits to drive you mad. "He's already mad," Crowley shouted. Matt turned about, riding the tossing ship as if she were a wild mare and he were determined to tame her. "Will, hard a starboard, ready with the sea anchor." "Aye, Captain." His first mate's voice boomed through the rain. His grin flashed like lightning across his dark face. "Crowley, back to work." Crowley glared, but he obeyed, pulling himself along the lines back to the waiting crew. Crowley objected to the cargo, to the season, but most of all, to the serving under a Negro mate. Matt had half a mind to bind the purser to the sea anchor and chuck him overboard. But Crowley was Lee's man, and besides, he needed all hands if he would harness the gale. If they could get to leeward of the island, it might offer some shelter at least. If not, they'd be halfway around the Horn before they could get their bearings. On the other hand, he'd heard the Indies had a strong market for ice. When the swells rose, Matt caught another glimpse of that land. Closer now, a twin-peaked rise, maybe as long as the whole of Phippsburg, Maine. The wind rushed them on, and he clung to his cap all the more. Stupid to be wearing it on a day like this. But the damn thing had brought him through the war. Pray God it carried him through this storm. Rain lashed down his neck, red hair curling limp against his cheeks, but he dare not spare his grip to push it back. "Should be me up there," Tahari said. "And you'd guide us to the Demon Isle? I don't think so." The point of land rushed toward them in a series of flashes, though none so powerful as the one that had dazzled him a few moments ago. With each stroke of lightning, Matt expected to hear the crack of a mast, but the jagged strokes struck upon the island's peak, making him wonder if Tahari might have the right of it. Demon-haunted. Matt had demons to spare, thanks to the war. They did not scare him anymore. Besides, who had more need of ice than a people who lived, so it was said, in fire? Over his shoulder, Matt called, "Ready!" "Aye," Will roared back. With each flash, Matt counted. Thunder rolled across the sky overhead. Another flash. There. "Now!" He swept the hat from his head and waved his arm. "Will, do it now!" "Heave! Heave!" Will ran down the deck and back again, an extra set of hands as the crew lifted the wood and sailcloth sea anchor and hurled it over the rail. The rope groaned against the capstan. Matt held his breath, praying it would hold. Then, with the sharp grace that defined her, the ship swung about, her bow aimed along the island's sheltered side. A ridge of stone rose up like those formidable clouds that had heralded the storm. Then the mountain sheared into the wind, cliffs towering too close. Diana swept alongside the stone, blessedly slowing. The storm still battered him, but the wind died to a frustrated howl. He had dared the storm and won. His shoulder aching with remembered pain, Matt unbent his fingers, not releasing his grip, but stretching out his hand, his muscles throbbing. How long had he been hanging on? He allowed himself a long breath as his men, his ship, his cargo, slipped behind the island to safety. Again, the water changed beneath him. Then Diana shuddered to a halt with the gritty sound of a sandbar deep below. Thrown off balance, Matt snatched for the netting, but his numb fingers failed him, and he tumbled from the rail into the sea. Water sucked him down as he plunged toward the sand. By the distant flash of lightning, he saw a wave of gleaming red in the sand beneath him. Crimson glass, apparently swept from the shores above and hoarded by the waves. He struck the sand, and his breath rushed into darkness. A woman gazed down on him, her face glowing faintly, leaving a ripple in the air as she moved her head, an after-image, as if he gazed too long at the sun. Her skin looked by turns darker than teak or mahogany, then swirled with ruby, reminding him of blown glass, still moving in a smoky furnace. Her eyes flickered like a forge's light, her gaze arrested by something near his head, and her lips parted in a breath of wonder. His heart fell, wishing it were his face that captured her, but still, she smiled, and that was enough. "What are you dreaming?" Will's voice. Matt kept his eyes closed, heat pouring down on him from that distant beauty. Very well. It was the sun that warmed him, not some glowing maiden with long, dark hair and flaming eyes. His head and arm throbbed, then a soothing cold settled against his skin, hands pressing the hard chill to his shoulder. Ice, to cool his fever. "Ooh, that's good. Thank you, Nurse Barton." Will's laughter echoed around him. Somewhere close by, water tumbled and waves stroked a gentle shore. "You're not in the Morris Island Hospital, Captain, and I'm no Clara Barton. More's the pity." Matt cracked open one eye. "I'm not dead, then." "Not this time." Will sat back with a wince of his own, rubbing his back. He had a long face, deep-set eyes, and dense, curly hair no wind could ruffle. Overhead, a makeshift structure of planks, branches, and foreign leaves kept the sun from burning Matt a shade to match his own hair. His mouth and nostrils stung with salt. "You reeled me in? Like a codfish and twice as floppy. You ever thought about staying short?" Matt held his hand palm down, as if he could press Matt into a more compact form. "Sure, I thought of it. And then I thought, when I get back to Phippsburg, old man Lee's bound to cut me down to size." He moved to sit up, and the pain swept through from his right shoulder, so he sagged back again to the blanket-covered sand. "I keep hoping you give up on that." Will moved to sit beside Matt in the shade. He mopped sweat from his brow with a square of gingham so worn that the red checks were a uniform pale gold. "Don't count on it." They shared a look that finished the conversation. "If you hadn't insisted on hiring me and those other Negroes," Will would say, "your folk would be perfectly happy to have you around." "If we would have both died with Colonel Shaw, I wouldn't have felt the need," Matt would reply. After the 54th led the charge on Fort Wagner, Matt found Will still alive in the press of the dead and the dying. Before the assault, the rebels vowed to bury the white officers and the Negro soldiers together in a common grave. With the Union retreat, everyone knew the rebels would bloody well make good on their oath. Will and Matt had limped out of that nightmare together. They wouldn't have made it as far as the field hospital without each other, and Matt was not about to let go now. "What's our disposition?" Will straightened up and squared his shoulders to something like military bearing, in spite of his torn uniform and weary features. "Good and stuck, sir. Work's begun on repairing the topsails and fitting the new rear mast, the one that had gone down in the first violent assault of the storm as they rushed to reef the sails. Some minor repairs. Three crewmen injured, Parker with a broken leg, McCobb caught a splinter as long as your arm, and yourself, knocked to the head and popped your shoulder. The usual, the damned injury that wouldn't let him be." Matt traced the sling on his right arm with his left hand, then followed it up to where a lump of ice wrapped in cloth sat cooling the ache. "You popped it back?" "Wasn't so easy this time." Will gazed out toward the ship. "Crowley's got a bad case of the grumbles, and Tahari's been in the aft cabin since we beached, muttering about demons." "We've already got one. Crowley. Who's the idiot brought him on board?" "That'd be you, sir." "Did you just call your captain an idiot?" "No, sir. I just don't like to contradict my commander." Will grinned. "Shut up." The entire crew, top to bottom, comprised the most motley assembly of sailors in all of Maine, the only ones willing to sign on to Matt's dream. In spite of Frederick Tudor's success down in Massachusetts a few years back, many sailors still held that a cargo of ice would melt en route, sinking the boat from the inside out. Aside from Lee, every shipyard in Phippsburg turned him down, all the faster when he explained his plan to have a mostly Negro crew to ship to the African coast. Matt held the bundle of ice to his shoulder and pushed toward sitting. Will caught him about the shoulders and got him steady. Diana sat upright across a sandbar at the base of a stream that ran down from the forested slope behind. The three-masted schooner with her high prow and smooth lines remained the most beautiful ship he'd ever seen. Lee was a bastard, but he had some fine shipwrights. Aside from the upper mast, she looked awfully good for what she'd been through. 3 injuries in a gale, and one of those was the same injury over again. Well, he could hardly count that. "Good and stuck," he said. "Look at her keel, how deep she's mired. Even the tide didn't lift her. I don't know how we'll get her afloat, except, Will shrugged. He rubbed his bit of gingham between his fingers. Except we unload the cargo. How much of it? They looked at the ship together, shallow water lapping at her planks, while the crew worked on deck or on the shingle nearby. Matt needed no reply. He could see the answer just by looking at her. Too much. Let's hope the demons need ice. Beg your pardon? Will reached over and gently prodded Matt's temple. Yep, knocked on the head, sure enough. I'm surprised that hard skull of yours didn't knock right through the hull and sink us yourself. I'm a madman. You knew that before we ever left Phippsburg. Will nodded. Me, I'm resting up and making nice with the nurses. You're playing with your ice pack and dreaming of cold cash. Everybody flirts with nurses, Will, but they marry the rich ones. Where's Tahari? Tell him to get the demons out here. Dreamer. Will snorted. You've always been the king of next week. I dreamed us this far, didn't I? Will took a leisurely look around from the endless sea before them to the grounded ship and the restless crew. Oh yeah, you sure did.